Hey guys, settle in, dim the lights. Maybe light a candle if you are feeling a little adventurous, or just let the soft hum of your surroundings lull you into this space with me. Take a deep, slow breath, let your shoulders drop, and just be. Let the sounds of a distant, calm ocean begin to wash over you. A gentle lapping against a hull, the faint creak of timbers whispering stories of voyages past, and let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from and what time it is for you. A little quiet ritual to connect us across time zones and across the centuries. And as always, if you find yourself drifting off pleasantly, a quiet like and subscribe helps this channel sail on, but only if it feels right to you. Tonight, we're not just telling stories, we're peeling back the layers of legend, sifting through the salt-crusted tales of the Caribbean to find the grains of truth beneath. We're journeying back some 300 years to the so-called Golden Age of Piracy, a time when the azure waters of the West Indies were a stage for both unparalleled freedom and unimaginable savagery. Forget the swashbuckling heroes and the cartoon villains. We're going to explore the stark, gritty reality of pirate life, the ingenious survival tactics, and the surprisingly democratic chaos that ruled the waves. So, as the gentle rhythm of the sea begins to work its magic, let's start with one of the most enduring, yet almost entirely fabricated, images of pirate punishment. You've seen it countless times in movies and books. The menacing silhouette against a stormy sky. A lone figure blindfolded, arms bound, slowly shuffling towards the edge of a narrow wooden plank. Beneath them, the churning, dark waters, perhaps even the ominous dorsal fin of a waiting shark. A drum beats a slow, morbid rhythm. The captain, a grim smirk twisting his scarred face, barks a final command, and with a last desperate lurch, the victim tumbles into the unforgiving depths, a final splash marking their watery grave. This, my friends, is walking the plank. It's the quintessential pirate punishment, a symbol of their cruel inventiveness. It's dramatic, it is terrifying, and it is almost entirely a fiction of later storytellers. Picture yourself as a real pirate, not a character in a thrilling novel. You're likely a practical person, a survivor, perhaps even a former sailor who endured the brutal discipline of the Royal Navy or the stingy provisions of a merchant vessel. Your life is hard, perilous, and often short. Time, for you, is a precious commodity, especially aboard a ship that needs constant attention, whether it is mending sails, scrubbing decks, or preparing for the next chase. Now, imagine you've captured a merchant captain who refused to surrender, or perhaps a crewmate has been caught hoarding water, or conspiring against the elected quartermaster. What's your goal? To eliminate the threat, yes, but also to instill fear and maintain order with maximum efficiency and minimum fuss. The idea of constructing a special plank, carefully balancing it over the side of the ship, forcing someone to walk it in a theatrical display, just doesn't align with the raw, pragmatic brutality of actual pirate life. Think of the effort involved, finding suitable timber, securing it, perhaps even rigging some kind of platform. And for what? A dramatic execution. Pirates weren't in the business of staging plays. They were in the business of survival and plunder. Every moment spent on such a ceremony was a moment taken away from looking for the next prize, maintaining the vessel, or simply enjoying the spoils of the last raid. The sea air, already thick with the scent of tar, stale rum, and unwashed bodies, didn't need the added perfume of theatricality. If a pirate captain needed to dispatch a traitor or a defiant enemy, they had far more direct and less time-consuming methods. A cutlass to the throat, a pistol shot to the head, a quick, unceremonious shove overboard with a weighted anchor to ensure they stayed down. These were the realities. No grandstanding, no slow-motion terror. Just cold, swift action. The ocean itself was a convenient, ever-present grave. Or, if a more prolonged psychological torment was desired, there was the dreaded practice of marooning. Imagine being stripped of your possessions, given a small flask of water, maybe a single pistol shot, and left on a deserted, sun-scorched islet, surrounded by nothing but endless blue and the mocking cries of gulls. The slow, agonizing death by thirst, hunger, and exposure was a far more potent and historically accurate pirate punishment than the theatrical walk off a plank. It was a lingering horror, a quiet despair, a very real threat that truly haunted the imagination of any sailor who crossed paths with the brethren of the coast. The plank, in contrast, largely entered the popular consciousness much later, popularized by authors like Robert Louis Stevenson in his classic tale, For Treasure Island Twend, precisely because of its dramatic power. It was a thrilling invention for a thrilling story, but not a common occurrence on the decks of real pirate ships. And as we drift further into the realm of piratical myth, let's turn our gaze to another enduring symbol, the treasure map. You can almost feel the brittle, parchment paper, yellowed with age, edges singed and torn. Perhaps a mysterious stain of blood or seawater. Intricate, swirling calligraphy marks the journey. Cryptic symbols hint at hidden dangers, and then, invariably, that bold crimson X. The definitive mark, promising untold riches buried deep beneath swaying palm trees on some forgotten, sun-drenched isle. The very thought conjures images of chests, overflowing with gleaming gold doubloons, sparkling jewels, and shimmering silver. It's romantic, it's adventurous, and it is, once again, largely a fantastical invention designed to fuel our imaginations. The truth about pirate treasure is, unfortunately, far less glamorous and far more fleeting. Real pirates were, by and large, men living for the moment. Their lives were a constant gamble against the sea, the elements, disease, and the long arm of naval justice. There was no concept of a retirement fund, no plans for a quiet old age spent counting coppers by a cozy hearth. The gold, silver, and other valuables they plundered were for immediate gratification. Think of the wild abandon of a pirate shore leave. The raucous taverns, the flowing rum, the gambling, the lavish spending on women and fleeting pleasures. A typical pirate crew, upon making a significant haul, would descend upon a friendly port, such as Tortuga or later Nassau, and embark on a furious days, long spree, spending their ill-gotten gains as quickly as they acquired them. The clatter of dice, the raucous laughter, the heavy scent of cheap perfume mingling with stale beer. These were the real sounds and smells of pirate wealth management. The logistics of burying vast hoards of treasure were also incredibly impractical. Imagine a heavy wooden chest, filled with hundreds of pounds of coins, being laboriously carried ashore, dug into the earth in secret, and then its location entrusted to a fragile map that could be lost, stolen, or misinterpreted. And who would draw this map? Which pirate, likely semi-literate at best, would be capable of creating such an intricate diagram. The chances of the pirate surviving long enough to return for their buried bounty were slim, and the chances of their crewmates keeping such a secret were even slimmer. Trust was a rare commodity in the pirate world, and a hidden treasure map would have been a constant source of paranoia and potential mutiny. The one notable exception to this general rule was Captain William Kidd, but his story is less about a pirate's buried loot and more about a privateer's desperate attempt to clear his name. Kidd, originally commissioned by the English crown as a privateer to hunt pirates, was later accused of piracy himself. His burying of treasure, specifically on Gardiner's Island off Long Island, was not done for future lavish spending, but rather as a strategic move. He hoped to use these goods as leverage, a means to prove his innocence, or at least negotiate a pardon. It was a calculated, individual act born out of extreme circumstances, not a standard operating procedure for the swashbuckling buccaneers of the Caribbean. The treasure itself was also not primarily gold and silver, but rather a collection of valuable yet portable commodities like silks, fine textiles, and some precious metals, forward items that could be traded or used as evidence. So, what Tortitude pirates considered treasure? It wasn't always sparkling gold. Often, it was the raw materials of their trade and survival: casks of rum, barrels of sugar, valuable spices like nutmeg and cinnamon, bales of cloth, gunpowder, muskets, and tools. These were essential commodities, highly valued in the colonial economy, easily traded for provisions, repairs, or the fleeting pleasures of shore leave. The true treasure was the immediate sustenance, the tools of their trade, and the means to keep their perilous adventure alive for just one more day. The romance of the X marks the spot map, a cornerstone of pirate lore, truly belongs to the imaginative world of fiction, a brilliant narrative device that continues to capture our hearts but has little grounding in the gritty, immediate realities of actual pirate life. As our gentle journey continues, let's explore another iconic image, one that seems to scream pirate from every fiber of its being: the eye patch, the weathered face, a grizzled beard, perhaps a scar or two, and always that distinctive black patch covering one eye. We tend to associate it with a lost eye, a grievous wound suffered in a daring sword fight, or from a splintered cannonball. And while it is certainly true that the life of a pirate was fraught with danger and injury, leading many to lose limbs or eyes, the eye patch often served a far more ingenious and tactical purpose than merely covering a missing orb. Imagine yourself on the deck of a pirate ship, the sun blazing down, reflecting off the shimmering water, creating a blinding glare. The tropical light is intense, almost painful. Now picture a boarding action, the chaos of cannons roaring, muskets firing, and the clash of cutlasses. You need to be able to move quickly to fight and to coordinate with your crew. But what happens when the fight moves from the brilliantly lit deck to the cramped, shadowy confines of the ship's hold, or a dark cabin below? Your eyes, adjusted to the dazzling sunlight, would be virtually useless in the sudden darkness. It takes precious seconds, sometimes even a full minute or more, for your pupils to dilate and your eyes to adapt to low light conditions. In the frantic, brutal world of a boarding battle, those seconds could mean the difference between life and death. This is where the pirates' tactical genius, their pragmatic cleverness, comes into play. The eye patch wasn't necessarily covering an empty socket, but rather a perfectly healthy eye that was being kept in a constant state of darkness. Think of it as a low-tech, organic form of night vision. When a pirate, engaged in combat on the sunlit deck, needed to quickly descend into the ship's dark interior, they wouldn't waste precious moments blinking and squinting. Instead, they would simply flip the eye patch from one eye to the other. The eye that had been hidden beneath the patch would already be perfectly accustomed to the darkness, allowing them instant, clear vision in the dim light below deck. This immediate adaptation provided a crucial, even deadly advantage over unsuspecting merchant sailors whose eyes would be struggling to adjust. Consider the sensory experience. One moment, the harsh, bright glare, the scent of sea salt and gunpowder in the air, the rhythmic creak of the deck beneath your boots. The next, you are plunging into the damp, musty darkness below, the smell of bilge water and old wood, the faint sounds of muffled shouts. To instantly switch from blinding light to functional sight in such a chaotic environment would have been an invaluable skill. It's a testament to the pirates' resourcefulness, their ability to turn what appears to be a disability or a consequence of injury into a shrewd combat advantage. It wasn't about looking fearsome, though it certainly added to their intimidating image. It was about survival, about gaining that infinitesimal edge in a fight where every second counted. The eye patch, therefore, is not just a symbol of a pirate's ruggedness, but a quiet, brilliant testament to their practical intelligence and their ability to adapt to the brutal realities of their world. A subtle blend of stale beer, human sweat, goat, and something you pray isn't mold. The image is etched into our collective memory, isn't it? A grizzled old sea dog, often with a peg leg or a patched eye, a brilliant, iridescent parrot perched proudly on his shoulder, a splash of tropical color against the faded canvas of a pirate's rough tunic, perhaps offering a witty, feathered commentary on the unfolding chaos. This, my friends, is the iconic, almost cinematic vision of a pirate's companion, epitomized by Robert Louis Stevenson's unforgettable Long John Silver in Treasure Island. We imagine a bond, a feathered confidante, a splash of exotic whimsy amidst the brutal realities of the open ocean. But let's gently pull back the veil of fiction for a moment and consider the rather more pragmatic and often less glamorous reality of life aboard a Golden Age pirate vessel. While it is true that sailors, when voyaging to far-flung, exotic lands, would sometimes acquire and keep fascinating creatures as pets, monkeys, colorful birds, even occasionally a small, curious lizard, the idea of a parrot as a constant, ever-present fixture on a pirate's shoulder during the thick of battle or the monotonous grind of a long voyage, well, that's where the romanticized image starts to fray at the edges. Imagine for a moment the sensory assault that was a pirate ship, the incessant creak of timbers, the snap and thrum of sails in the wind, the rhythmic slap of waves against the hull, the shouts and curses of dozens of men, the clang of metal, the roar of cannon fire. Now, add to that symphony of chaos the piercing shriek of a parrot. These aren't quiet, contemplative creatures. Parrots are loud, they are boisterous, they are easily startled. During a boarding action, a moment of utter bedlam where every man's life hangs by a thread, a sudden panicked squawk from a parrot could be distracting, unnerving. A ship's deck, particularly during a chase or a fight, was a treacherous, moving landscape of ropes, cannons, spilled grog, and the unpredictable surge of the ocean. A small, fragile bird, perched precariously on a shoulder, would be incredibly vulnerable. It could be struck by a stray cutlass, caught in the tangle of rigging, or simply flung into the unforgiving waves by a sudden lurch of the ship. It's a bit like trying to navigate a bustling modern construction site with a highly sensitive noise. A verse companion constantly perched on your ear. Utterly impractical and, frankly, a recipe for a very short-lived pet. Furthermore, the practicalities of keeping such a creature alive and healthy on a long sea voyage were considerable. What would it eat? While parrots are adaptable, their natural diet of fruits, seeds, and nuts might be hard to come by after weeks at sea, beyond the first few days of fresh provisions. Fresh water, always a precious commodity, would be needed not just for drinking but potentially for cleaning a messy bird. And let's not forget the mess itself. Parrots, for all their beauty, are not known for their impeccable hygiene. On a ship already grappling with the perpetual challenges of sanitation and cleanliness, adding another source of droppings and discarded food scraps would hardly be welcomed. So, while a seasoned sailor might occasionally enjoy the companionship of a small, exotic pet during calmer times in port, or on a particularly uneventful stretch of ocean, the notion of a parrot as an indispensable, battle-ready companion seems to belong firmly in the realm of swashbuckling fiction. The harsh, unforgiving reality of pirate life simply didn't allow for such delicate, high-maintenance mascots. The real companions of a pirate were their weapons, their shipmates, and the constant, nagging hunger for the next score. A bird was a luxury, a fleeting moment of beauty perhaps, but rarely a constant fixture in the tumultuous, often brutal, daily grind of the Golden Age of Piracy. The sea was a taskmaster, and every inch of space, every drop of fresh water, every moment of attention was usually reserved for the business of survival and plunder. Now, shift your gaze from the fantastical to something truly unexpected, a facet of pirate life that stands in stark contrast to the romanticized chaos. The surprising degree of democracy and self-governance found aboard many Golden Age pirate vessels. When we think of the 18th century, we typically envision rigid hierarchies, absolute monarchs, and societies where birthright and rank dictated almost every aspect of existence. Life with a common man, particularly a sailor, was often brutish, short, and undeniably oppressive. Yet, on the decks of a pirate ship, something remarkably different was often brewing. Sunday, a floating, anarchic republic, decades, even centuries ahead of its time in terms of egalitarian ideals. Compare this to the harsh realities of a Royal Navy warship or a merchant vessel. There, authority flowed strictly downwards. Captains were appointed, not elected, and their word was law. Discipline was often brutal, enforced with whips and nine tails for even minor infractions. Food was meager, pay was often withheld or delayed, and the threat of impressment, forced service loomed large. A sailor on such a ship was little more than a cog in a vast, uncaring machine, his life and limb expendable at the whim of an officer. Imagine the crushing weight of that daily reality. The constant fear of the lash, the gnawing hunger, the utter lack of agency over your own fate. Now, step aboard a pirate ship here. Things were often radically different. The captain, the very figurehead of the vessel, was not chosen by a distant king or a shipping magnate. He was elected by the crew itself, by a show of hands or a shouted vote. This wasn't a lifetime appointment. If a captain proved cowardly in battle, incompetent in navigation, or simply tyrannical and unjust, the crew had the power to depose him. They could, and often did, vote him out of office, sending him back to the ranks, or in more extreme cases, marooning him on a deserted island, tuning a harsh but potent reminder that his power stemmed directly from the will of the men he commanded. This was a direct, raw form of democracy, born not of high ideals but of practical necessity and shared grievances. It was a clear rejection of the top-down tyranny they had likely fled. Beyond the captain, another figure wielded immense, often surprising, authority, the quartermaster. During battle, the captain was supreme, directing the fighting, making split-second decisions. But in the day-to-day running of the ship, outside of direct combat, the quartermaster's power often surpassed the captain's. This individual, also elected by the crew, was responsible for managing the ship's stores, ensuring fair distribution of provisions and plunder, and crucially, mediating disputes among the crew. If two pirates got into an argument, perhaps over a game of cards or a perceived slight, it was the quartermaster who would hear both sides and hand down a judgment, often with the backing of the entire crew. Think about the significance of this role. In a volatile environment teeming with hardened, often desperate men, the quartermaster was the ultimate arbiter of fairness and justice. His role was to prevent the internal squabbles that could tear a pirate crew apart. He ensured that the hard-won spoils of their dangerous life were divided equitably, according to the ship's articles, under the pirate code they all signed. No captain, however charismatic, could override the quartermaster on matters of daily discipline or plunder distribution without facing a direct challenge from his crew. This system created a sense of shared ownership and mutual accountability, a stark contrast to the oppressive regimes of official navies and merchant fleets. This isn't to say pirate ships were utopian societies. Far from it. They were still filled with rough, often violent men living a brutal existence. But the democratic structures they built were a powerful testament to their shared desire for freedom and justice, a freedom they had been denied in their previous lives. It was a radical experiment in self-governance, a defiant middle finger to the empires that scorned them, proving that even among outlaws, there could be a yearning for a different, fairer way of life, even if that life was short, dangerous, and often ended at the gallows. This democratic spirit, born of rebellion and necessity, was one of the most remarkable, yet often overlooked, aspects of the Golden Age of Piracy. It was a place where, for a fleeting time, the common man had a voice, a vote, and a shared stake in the dangerous enterprise. The Golden Age of Piracy, as we romanticize it today, was not an era spanning centuries, nor a grand, unceasing reign of terror on the high seas. Instead, it was a surprisingly brief, incandescent flare in the annals of maritime history, lasting roughly from the late 17th century through the 1720s. We're talking about a mere few decades, a fleeting breath in the grand narrative of human civilization, yet one that has left an indelible mark on our imaginations. To truly understand this brevity, we must first understand the forces that allowed it to ignite, and then the concerted efforts that finally snuffed it out. The genesis of this golden age is deeply intertwined with the geopolitical machinations of European empires. The Caribbean, a jewel box of islands and a gateway to the riches of the New World, was a constant battleground for powers like England, France, Spain, and the Netherlands. During periods of war, These nations often employed what were known as privateers, essentially state-sanctioned pirates. These privateers were granted letters of marque, allowing them to legally attack and plunder enemy merchant ships. For the duration of a conflict, these men were heroes, patriots, and entrepreneurs, enriching their home countries and themselves. They learned the brutal trade of naval warfare, honed their sailing skills, and became adept at the arts of capture and plunder, all under the protective umbrella of their respective crowns. However, when peace treaties were signed often abruptly, and without much thought for the men who had been fighting, thousands of these skilled, experienced, and battle-hardened sailors were suddenly rendered unemployed. Imagine these men highly proficient in weaponry, navigation, and maritime combat, but with no legitimate employment prospects. Their lives at sea had made them tough, resourceful, and unwilling to return to the meager, often brutal existence of a common laborer on land. Many had also tasted the intoxicating freedom and potential wealth that came with taking prizes at sea. The alternative of returning to the poverty and oppression of shore life, or the harsh, unforgiving discipline and abysmal pay of a merchant ship or Royal Navy vessel, was simply intolerable. So, for many, the transition was almost inevitable. They had the skills, the ships, and the shared camaraderie forged in conflict. The only difference was that now, without letters of marque, their actions were deemed illegal by all nations. They ceased being privateers and became pirates. This swelling pool of experienced, desperate men, coupled with the rich shipping lanes of the Caribbean and the relatively weak colonial administrations, created the perfect storm for piracy to flourish. Ports like Nassau in the Bahamas became de facto pirate republics, offering sanctuary markets for their plunder and opportunities to recruit more disaffected sailors. It was a period of wild, untamed growth, fueled by unemployment, greed, and a thirst for freedom from the established order. But this very success contained the seeds of its own destruction. As piracy escalated, becoming a severe threat to international trade and the economic interests of these same European powers, their attitudes shifted dramatically. The pirates, once tolerated or even encouraged as privateers, were now a common enemy, an existential threat to the global economy. The peace that had brought about the surge in piracy now allowed nations to focus their formidable naval resources on a coordinated suppression effort. The endgame for the Golden Age was a multi-pronged assault. Royal navies, particularly the British, began to systematically patrol key shipping lanes, hunting down pirate vessels with increasing intensity. Bounties were placed on notorious captains, and perhaps most effectively, governments began to offer general pardons. These pardons offered a carrot rather than just a stick, a chance for pirates to abandon their lives of crime, surrender, and receive a full pardon for their past misdeeds, allowing them to return to a civilian life without fear of execution. This strategy proved highly effective, sowing dissent among pirate crews and offering a tempting escape route for those tired of the constant danger and the ever-tightening net. The combination of overwhelming naval force, aggressive bounty hunting, and the strategic deployment of pardons ultimately proved too much for the decentralized, anarchic world of piracy. Their havens were raided, their ships were captured, and their leaders were brought to justice spine, often a swift, brutal justice at the end of a hangman's rope. The tide turned swiftly, and by the late 1720s, The great pirate captains had been hunted down, their crews dispersed, and the romantic dream of a lawless life on the high seas largely extinguished. The Golden Age, a brief, defiant roar against the might of empires, faded into the whispers of legend, leaving behind a legacy far grander than its actual duration might suggest. It was a vivid, yet ultimately unsustainable expression of freedom in an unfree world. The whispers of the past continue to drift on the evening breeze, guiding us deeper into the true heart of the pirate's world. We've spoken of myths and legends, but now, let's peel back another layer, considering the very men and women who found themselves adrift in this lawless era, their motivations, their daily sustenance, and the bitter realities that shape their lives. You might imagine them as born villains, men with cold, calculating eyes and a taste for wanton cruelty from birth. But the truth, as it often is far more nuanced, more human. Most who took up the Jolly Roger weren't inherently evil, not in the way stories often paint them. No, many were simply ordinary sailors, pushed to their breaking point, escaping a life that, for all its supposed legality, was often a greater torment than the high seas offered. Imagine for a moment, if you will, being one of these men you've spent years on merchant vessels, or perhaps even worse, in the King's Royal Navy. The pay, a pittance, barely enough to keep your family from starvation, if you even had a family waiting. Sometimes you'd sail for months, even a year, only to be told the voyage didn't turn a sufficient profit, and your promised wages would be cut or simply vanish into the captain's coffers. You might sign on for one journey, only to find yourself impressed, forced into years of service against your will. The Navy's grip as unforgiving as the ocean itself. Your food, even on the best of days, was meager and monotonous, a grim preview of what we'll explore in more detail shortly. But it wasn't just the hunger that gnawed at your spirit, it was the constant, crushing oppression. On a merchant ship, the captain was a king, his word law, his temper a storm more feared than any hurricane. Disobedience, perceived laziness, or even just being in the wrong place at the wrong time could earn you the cat o' nine tails. A whip designed not just to hurt, but to flay the flesh from your back, leaving scars that would scream of your humiliation for the rest of your short life. You'd witness your shipmates flogged for infractions you didn't even understand. The sound of the lash biting into skin, a chilling symphony of brutality. The fear of the boatswain's pipe, signaling a fresh round of punishment, was a constant companion. Then there was the constant danger, not just from storms or enemy schnoops, but from the very structure of the life you led. Accidents were common. A falling spar, a rogue wave, a misplaced foot on a slippery deck thuni. Any could mean a broken limb, a fractured skull, or a swift, cold plunge into the depths, never to be seen again. There were no doctors, no proper care. A broken leg meant a lifelong limp, if you were lucky enough to heal. And disease, it swept through ships like wildfire, consuming crews in silent, agonizing waves. Dysentery, typhoid, yellow fever, sandy. Each voyage was a gamble with death. The odds stacked heavily against you. The stifling, unhygienic conditions below deck, the packed bunks, the ever-present stench of bilge water, sweat, and despair created fertile ground for sickness to flourish. You were a cog in a vast, impersonal machine, easily replaced, utterly disposable. Imagine that life for a moment, the bitter cold of a North Atlantic night. your hands numb hauling ropes until your palms bled. The stifling heat of the Caribbean, sweat stinging your eyes as you swelter below deck, the air thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and sour provisions. The endless, monotonous watch, staring out at an empty horizon, the only sound the creak of timbers and the endless hiss of waves against the hull. And always, the knowledge that your efforts, your suffering, were building wealth for someone else, someone who would never know your name or care for your plight. Then, a rumor reaches you, a whisper on the wind, a tale of a black flag of a ship where the men choose their own captain, where the spoils are shared, where the whip is almost unheard of. A life of high risk, yes, but also one of potential high reward. A life where you might, just might, be treated like a man, not a beast of burden. For many, this wasn't a choice for evil. It was a desperate leap for freedom, a gamble for a taste of dignity in a world that had offered them none. It was a choice between a slow, agonizing death under the thumb of a cruel master, or a swift, perhaps glorious, one under the banner of rebellion. It was the siren call of autonomy, a chance to decide your own fate, even if that fate was ultimately sealed by the hangman's noose. They weren't born criminals, they were forged by desperation, escapees from a system that offered them only servitude and suffering. And so, many a seasoned sailor, driven by a profound sense of injustice and a burning desire for a better, freer, even if shorter, life, found themselves crossing that invisible line from loyal subject to defiant pirate. The sea, for them, wasn't just a workplace. It became a sanctuary, a stage for a radical, if short-lived experiment in self-governance and defiance. Now let's talk about sustenance. You are adrift on the vast, indifferent ocean, often for weeks, even months at a time. The sun beats down, or the rain lashes the decks. What do you drink to quench that endless thirst, to survive the long, arduous days? You might instantly think of rum, that potent, fiery spirit so synonymous with pirate lore. And you wouldn't be entirely wrong. Rum certainly held a central place in the pirate culture, a warming balm against the cold, a temporary escape from the harsh realities of their existence, and a potent symbol of their rebellious spirit. But it was far from their only drink, and often it served a far more utilitarian purpose than mere intoxication. The most critical challenge on any long sea voyage was, and still is, fresh water, stored in wooden casks, often for extended periods. Fresh water quickly became foul. Imagine dipping your cup into a barrel, only to find the water murky, green with algae, teeming with insect larvae, and emitting a stench that would turn your stomach. It wasn't just unpleasant, it was a breeding ground for disease. Dysentery, caused by contaminated water, could decimate a crew faster than any battle. So, a solution was desperately needed. Enter grog. This wasn't a choice, it was a necessity. To make the putrid water palatable, and more importantly, safer, sailors would mix it with something strong. Rum, with its high alcohol content, was perfect for this. The alcohol would help to disinfect the water, killing off some of the harmful bacteria, and its strong flavor would mask the awful taste of stagnant, rotten water. So, your daily ration of water would often come pre-mixed with a generous portion of rum, creating a concoction known as grog. It was a watery, alcoholic blend, a daily ritual to ensure that the fluid you consumed didn't poison you. This wasn't always a celebratory drink. It was often a grim, practical measure to stave off thirst and sickness. Imagine the taste tank, a faint tang of salt from the sea air, mixed with the acrid notes of stale wood, perhaps a hint of lime if they were lucky enough to have some. The burning warmth of the rum cutting through the dull, flat taste of the water, a necessary evil rather than a delightful beverage. But rum, or grog, wasn't the only liquid companion on these voyages. Beer, too, played a significant role, particularly in the early days of long-distance sailing. Beer, especially stout, was a stable, fermented drink that didn't spoil as quickly as fresh water. More importantly, it offered calories and some much-needed nutrients, a small but vital energy boost for men engaged in relentless physical labor. Imagine the quantity huge barrels stowed deep in the hold, carefully rationed, each sip a precious resource. You might wake to your morning ration of weak beer, a far cry from the delicate brews of today, but a robust, sustaining liquid that formed a cornerstone of your daily intake. It was another way to supplement a diet often devoid of fresh produce and bursting with salt. Sometimes, though less commonly for pirates focused on immediate gratification rather than long voyages of exploration, wine or cider might be plundered or consumed when in port. These would have been rare luxuries, offering a brief respite from the ever-present rum and grog. The distinct flavor of a stolen Spanish wine, perhaps, briefly transporting you from the grimy deck to a sun-drenched vineyard, before the reality of your situation inevitably returned. But for the most part, it was grog, that functional, life-sustaining, yet often unappetizing mix and robust beer that kept you hydrated, or at least from dehydrating into oblivion during those long, dangerous months at sea. The very act of drinking became a calculated risk, a balance between the need for hydration and the constant battle against contamination, each sip a reminder of the precariousness of life on the open ocean. So you've chosen this perilous life, or perhaps it chose you, driven by the injustices of another world, and you've quenched your thirst with grog and beer, a functional necessity rather than a pure pleasure. Now let's turn our attention to the food itself, the grim reality of what sustained a pirate crew, a daily menu that would make modern palates recoil. Prepare yourself, for this is where the romance of the high seas truly gives way to the gritty, unvarnished truth of survival. Your primary staple, the very foundation of almost every meal, was something known as hardtack, or ship's biscuit. Forget anything resembling the soft, fluffy bread of today. This was a rock-hard, unleavened biscuit made from coarse rye or barley flour, sometimes even bulked up with sawdust or ground acorns when supplies were low. Imagine a flat, dense beige-colored brick, perhaps 3 to 4 inches square, a 1/4 inch thick, baked multiple times to remove every last trace of moisture. Its sole purpose was preservation, to last for months, even years, without spoiling. Eating it was an exercise in pure determination. It was so hard, so utterly impenetrable, that biting into it directly would likely chip a tooth. No, you didn't eat hardtack in the conventional sense. You managed-dyed it. You might soak it in water if the water wasn't too foul. Or, more commonly, you dip it into your grog or beer, letting it soften just enough to become chewable, turning into a bland, sodden pulp. Some would smash it with the butt of their knife, or even a hammer to break it into smaller, more manageable pieces, mixing it into other dishes if they were available. The flavor. Imagine eating compressed flour and dust. It was utterly devoid of taste, a mere vessel for calories. And it was never alone. Even this hardy, unyielding biscuit came with its own unwelcome companions, weevils. These small, dark beetles, attracted by the grains, would bore into the hardtack, establishing colonies within its dense structure. You'd break open a biscuit, and there they would be, tiny, crawling specks. Sometimes the weevils would be dead, baked into the biscuit. Other times, they'd be very much alive, wriggling. The phrase, full of life, took on a grim, literal meaning. You'd learn to pick them out, or simply ignore them, for to truly inspect your food was to risk losing what little appetite you had. Old salts, hardened by countless voyages, would even joke that the moving ones were the fresh ones, adding a touch of protein to his otherwise barren diet. Imagine the crunch, the subtle squish of these insects between your teeth. It was a constant, low-level assault on your senses, a daily reminder of the desperate conditions. For protein, your options were equally uninspiring. Mostly it was salted beef or pork, preserved in brine to last the journey. Imagine chunks of meat, tough and stringy, soaked in salt for so long that much of its original flavor was gone, replaced by an overwhelming, almost burning, saltiness. Before cooking, you'd have to repeatedly soak and rinse the meat in seawater to draw out some of the excess salt, a laborious process that still left it intensely briny. When cooked, it was usually boiled, becoming even tougher, resembling shoe leather more than tender steak. This was your primary source of sustenance. Day in and day out, its monotonous texture and taste becoming a weary constant. Occasionally, if they were lucky enough to catch a fish, or if they raided a merchant ship with a small store of live animals, there might be a brief respite of fresh meat. But these were rare, fleeting luxuries. And then there was scurvy. This wasn't a punishment or an enemy's ship. It was a silent, insidious killer, more feared than any cutlass. Caused by a prolonged lack of vitamin C, scurvy would slowly, horribly consume a crew. Imagine your gums swelling, bleeding, turning black, your teeth loosening and falling out. Old wounds, long healed, would reopen. Your skin would become discolored, covered in dark spots, and your limbs would ache, your joints swelling, making every movement an agony. Fatigue would set in, a profound soul-crushing weariness that no amount of rest could alleviate. Eventually, without fresh fruits or vegetables, the only true cure thucky, you would succumb, your body breaking down, your mind clouding with delirium, until death finally brought release. It was a constant, looming threat, a reminder that even if you survived battles and storms, the very act of existing on these long voyages could kill you from within. Sometimes, if they were in port or had plundered a ship with more varied cargo, there might be a brief, glorious feast. Fresh fruits, vegetables, perhaps even some poultry or cheese. But these moments were rare, and the perishable goods would quickly spoil, returning the crew to the grim reality of hardtack, salted meat, and the ever-present threat of scurvy. This, then, was the pirate's menu, a testament to endurance, a daily struggle against hunger, disease, and the sheer monotony of bland, preserved food. Each meal a reminder of the thin line between survival and oblivion on the vast, unforgiving ocean. Imagine, for a moment, the relentless sway of the ship beneath your feet, the constant creak of timbers, the salt spray that never quite leaves your skin. This is your home, your world, and your workplace. Now, imagine a moment of chaos, the unexpected crack of a mast, a slip on a wet deck, or worse, the terrifying clang of steel on steel during a boarding action. A sudden searing pain shoots through your arm. A musket ball, perhaps, or a jagged splinter from a splintered rail. You look down, and the crimson bloom on your coarse tunic tells an undeniable story. In this world, this wild, untamed expanse of the open sea in the early 18th century, the luxury of a skilled physician is a notion as foreign as a featherbed. There are no starched white coats, no antiseptic wipes, no gleaming surgical instruments waiting for you in a sterile environment. Your ship, a vessel of freedom and terror, is also a vessel of immense peril, and when injury strikes, you are truly sailing into uncharted waters of pain and crude intervention. The surgeon on a pirate vessel, if such a grand title can even be applied, is often not a man of refined medical training. More frequently, he is the ship's carpenter. Think about it. Who else aboard possesses the necessary tools for such grim work? A saw, for instance, is not just for planks and spars. It has a far more desperate bone. Chilling application, an axe usually reserved for severing thick ropes or shoring up a damaged mast, suddenly takes on a new, terrifying purpose when heated to a searing red in the galley fire. The air in the ship's cramped, dimly lit lower deck, which serves as the makeshift infirmary, is thick with the metallic tang of blood, the acrid scent of gunpowder, and the cloying sweetness of stale rum, often used as an anesthetic furti, a crude attempt to dull the edges of the unbearable agony that is about to unfold. You are laid out on a rough wooden table, or perhaps just a plank pulled across two barrels, the ship's perpetual rocking doing little to steady your trembling frame. Your comrades, hardened men though they are, avoid your gaze, their faces etched with a mixture of pity and the chilling realization that it could easily be them next. If the wound is a simple cut, a deep gash, or a nasty bruise, you might be lucky. It will be cleaned, as best as possible, with seawater, or again rum, and then bound with rough linen strips. But if the bone is shattered, if the limb is mangled beyond repair, if the flesh is putrefying with a swift and terrible infection, then the carpenter, surgeon stands over you, his eyes grim, his hand reaching for his most fearsome tool. The saw, imagine the sound it makes. Not the clean, precise whine of a modern surgical saw, but the grating, tearing sound of a hand saw, designed for wood, now tearing through flesh and bone. Your comrades might press a bottle of rum to your lips, or a leather strap between your teeth, anything to suppress the screams that threaten to tear your throat. The carpenter, his brow furrowed with concentration, works with a brutal efficiency, a macabre-browed dance of necessity and agony. He is not trying to save the limb, he is trying to save Thunyu, to prevent the poison of gangrene from creeping further into your body, to offer you a slim, desperate chance at survival. Once the deed is done, once the severed limb lies on the floor, oh grisly trophy of survival, the next horror begins, the cauterization. A heated axe head or a glowing hot dagger, pulled from the coals, is pressed against the raw stump. The smell of burning flesh fills the air, mingling with the cries that can no longer be held back. This isn't just to stop the bleeding, it's to seal the wound, to prevent the omnipresent infections from taking root. The pain is unimaginable, a white-hot agony that sears itself into your very soul. And then, as if this were not enough, coarse tar, usually reserved for sealing the ship's hull, is slathered onto the wound, a crude, desperate attempt at an antiseptic and a protective barrier against the vengeful sea air. Yet, amidst this brutality, there is a strange, unexpected glimmer of something akin to justice, or at least pragmatism. The pirate code, that self-imposed law of the sea, often included clear provisions for compensation for such grievous injuries. You might have lost an arm, a leg, or an eye, becoming a one-armed Jack or a peg-leg Pete. But your sacrifice would not go unrewarded. A significant sum of money, perhaps 600 or 800 pieces of eight, would be paid to you from the common treasury, a testament to your bravery and a recognition of your diminished capacity for future labor. This was a crude form of early workers' compensation, a stark contrast to the Royal Navies where a lost limb might earn you nothing but a discharge and a begging bowl. You would spend weeks, maybe months, convalescing, fighting off the fever, the infection, the crushing pain. Your body would slowly heal, but you would be forever changed, a living testament to the unforgiving nature of the pirate's life and the brutal ingenuity of survival on the high seas. Even a simple fever, a nasty cough, or a festering cut could swiftly turn fatal in this world, devoid of antibiotics and basic hygiene. Sickness, silent and relentless, was often a greater foe than any man. A war. Each morning you awoke, you were grateful for the breath in your lungs, knowing that many a good man had slipped away in the night, his feverish dreams replaced by the cold embrace of the ocean depths. The vast, undulating canvas of the ocean stretches out before you, an endless expanse of blue and gray. The wind whips through your hair, carrying the scent of salt and adventure. But then, on the distant horizon, a speck appears. It grows slowly but relentlessly, taking on the unmistakable silhouette of a ship. Your heart quickens. Is it friend or foe? A merchant vessel laden with riches, or a king's frigate, an instrument of justice. As the ship draws closer, the details begin to sharpen, and your breath catches in your throat. High on its mast, flapping defiantly against the cerulean sky, is not the familiar flag of any known nation. No Union Jack, no Fleur de Lis, no Spanish cross. Instead, it's a design of pure, unadulterated terror. The Jolly Roger. Now, don't imagine a single uniform flag like some kind of corporate logo. The Jolly Roger, while sharing common elements, was far more varied, a personal brand of terror for each legendary captain. Blackbeard, for instance, the most fearsome of them all, flew a flag depicting a horned skeleton or devil figure, often holding an hourglass in one hand, symbolizing that his victim's time was running out, and a spear in the other, piercing a bleeding heart. A chilling promise of swift, brutal death if they dared to resist. Calico Jack Rackham, known for his flashy attire, chose a simpler design, a skull above two crossed cutlasses, a clear, unmistakable declaration of his profession. Bartholomew Roberts, the elegant and deadly. Black Bart flew a flag showing himself, standing on two skulls, one representing a Barbadian's head, the other a Martiniquean's, a grim memento of his conquests in those islands. The act of raising the Jolly Roger was not merely a symbolic gesture, it was a psychological weapon of immense power. It was a declaration, a warning, a cold, hard choice presented to the approaching vessel. When the black flag with its stark, terrifying imagery was unfurled, It meant one thing: surrender now, and you might live. Resist, and you will die. Imagine being on that merchant ship, gazing up at that grim banner as it draws ever nearer. The blood drains from your face. The shouts of your captain, usually so authoritative, now sound strained, desperate. The sight of that flag was often enough to shatter morale, to paralyze crews with fear, to break their will to fight. Many a merchant captain, seeing that infamous symbol, would order his men to strike their sails, to surrender without a shot fired. Why? Because the alternative was almost certainly worse. A fight against a pirate ship, especially one flying the Jolly Roger, was a gamble with stacked odds, and the ultimate prize for losing was a swift, brutal, and often pointless death. The pirates understood this perfectly. Their goal wasn't to engage in long drawn-out naval battles that could damage their prize due, the very ship and its cargo they sought to plunder. Their goal was efficiency, intimidation, a quick and decisive victory through terror. The Jolly Roger was their marketing tool, a brand that spoke volumes without a single word. It broadcasted their reputation, their ruthlessness, their utter disregard for conventional law. But there was another flag, one even more terrifying than the Black Jolly Roger. This was the red flag. Known as the Blood Red or Jolly Red in some accounts, it conveyed a message of absolute unsparing brutality. No quarter. When the red flag was hoisted, it meant that the time for negotiation, for mercy, for surrender was over. It signified that the pirates would take no prisoners. Every soul on board the target vessel would be put to the sword. Men, women, children, the sword, if any were aboard Souvene, would be slaughtered without hesitation. There would be no mercy, no quarter given, no chance to escape the gruesome fate awaiting them. It was a terrifying ultimatum, a final, chilling declaration that resistance had sealed their doom, and their only remaining choice was how they would meet it. The psychological impact of seeing a red flag unfurled must have been immense. All hope would vanish. The quiet desperation of facing the black flag would transform into a primal animalistic terror. It was a rare sight, for even pirates understood the strategic value of instilling fear with the vivid threat to a violence, rather than always resorting to indiscriminate slaughter. A ship that surrendered easily was a ship that could be plundered quickly and efficiently. But if a crew stubbornly resisted, if they dared to defy the Jolly Roger, then the red flag became their ultimate, bloody answer. It was a promise of total annihilation, a final, horrifying exclamation mark on their reign of terror. Forget the sprawling, magnificent broadsides you see in epic films, where majestic warships trade volleys of cannon fire for hours, splintering timber and tinnering sails in a grand theatrical display of naval might. Real pirate combat, in the raw, brutal world of the Caribbean in the Golden Age, was a far more intimate, terrifying, and ruthlessly efficient affair. Pirates were not interested in glory or a fair fight. They were interested in plunder, and to get to that plunder, they needed to capture a ship, not destroy it. Their vessels, unlike the massive ships of the line favored by the Royal Navy, were typically smaller, faster, and far more maneuverable. Think of sloops, schooners, and brigantines, nimble hunters designed for speed and pursuit, not heavy firepower. They were built for the chase, for slipping through shallow reefs where larger warships dared not venture, and for closing the distance with astonishing swiftness. The actual battle often began long before any shots were fired. It started with the chase. A pirate ship would spot a fat merchant vessel, heavy with cargo, lumbering across the waves. The cry would go up, "Sail ho!" and a surge of adrenaline would course through the pirate crew. Every available hand would be put to the rigging, sails trimmed to catch every ounce of wind. The smaller, faster pirate ship relentlessly gaining on its prey. Imagine the merchant crew nervously watching that ominous sail grow larger and larger on their stern, knowing with a sinking feeling what it almost certainly represented. As the distance closed, the psychological warfare would begin in earnest. The infamous Jolly Roger, perhaps the Black One, would be hoisted, a silent yet deafening declaration of intent. Then, as they drew even closer, the pirates would unleash a volley of shouts, curses, and even musket fire, not necessarily to kill but to terrify. The sheer volume of noise, the sight of dozens of wild-eyed men clambering onto the rails, their cutlasses gleaming, their pistols cocked, was often enough to break the spirit of any merchant crew. The ideal outcome for a pirate crew was always to force a surrender without firing a single cannon shot that could damage the prize. Every hole blasted in the hull, every mast shattered, every piece of cargo ruined by shrapnel diminished their profit. Their strategy was shock and awe, designed to make the target ship's crew decide that fighting back was a futile and suicidal endeavor. But if the merchant ship, emboldened by a brave captain or sheer desperation, decided to put up a fight, then the battle transformed. Still, the goal was not a broadside duel. The pirates' aim was to close the distance as rapidly as possible, to grapple alongside and to board the enemy ship. This was where their true advantage lay. Imagine the deafening crash as the two ships slammed together, timbers groaning under the impact. Grappling hooks, heavy and sharp, would be flung across the gap, biting deep into the enemy's rigging, lashing the two vessels inexorably together. Then, with a roar, the pirates would swarm across the rails, a wave of frenzied humanity, armed with a terrifying array of close-quarters weaponry. Cutlasses, those heavy curved blades, were the primary weapon, perfect for the cramped, chaotic confines of a ship's deck. Boarding axes designed for chopping through ropes and splintering wood found grim new uses against flesh and bone. Pistols, though often single-shot and notoriously inaccurate, were fired at point-blank range, their thunderous reports adding to the cacophony. Daggers, dirks, even marlinspikes, anything that could pierce or bludgeon booty became instruments of swift, brutal violence. This was hand-to-hand combat at its most savage. There was no room for elaborate fencing maneuvers, no time for strategic retreats. It was a maelstrom of desperate blows, of pushing, shoving, stabbing, and slashing. The deck would become slick with blood, the air thick with the smell of sweat, fear, and gunpowder. Pirate crews, often outnumbering the merchant sailors, relied on their ferocity, their unity, and their sheer numbers to overwhelm any resistance. They fought with a desperate intensity born of a life lived on the edge, a stark contrast to the often poorly trained and unmotivated merchant sailors who were fighting for meager wages, not their freedom or their next meal. The boarding action itself was usually swift and decisive. Once the initial resistance was broken, once the merchant captain was captured or killed, the remaining crew would quickly surrender. The pirates, having secured their prize, would then begin the systematic process of plundering. Every corner of the ship would be searched for valuables, not just chests of gold, which were rare, but more commonly, barrels of rum, sacks of sugar, bolts of silk, stacks of valuable timber, navigational instruments, weapons, and provisions. Any cargo that could be sold or used was fair game. The treatment of the captured crew varied. Some might be marooned, left on a deserted island with minimal provisions, a slow, agonizing death. Others, especially those with useful skills like carpentry or navigation, might be given the choice to join the pirate crew, often under duress. The most common fate, however, was simply to be stripped of their valuables, possibly given a small boat or left on their damaged ship, and sent on their way with a chilling warning not to cross paths with the Jolly Roger again. The goal was always to minimize damage to the ship and its contents, to take the bounty as quickly and cleanly as possible, and then to vanish back into the endless blue, leaving behind a tale of terror and loss. The real battle was a whirlwind of calculated intimidation and brutal efficiency, far removed from the romanticized cannonades of the silver screen. The rhythmic creak of timbers, a soft symphony that had lulled countless souls to a restless sleep. On those endless stretches of open water, where the horizon blurred into an indifferent eternity, time itself seemed to stretch and warp. Days bled into weeks, and weeks into months, each marked by the monotonous rhythm of the waves and the demanding chores of life at sea. But even in this stark, unforgiving world, the human spirit, stubborn and resilient, sought solace, sought a brief respite from the gnawing anxieties of the unknown. And so, amid the constant threat of squalls and skirmishes, the pirates carved out moments for entertainment, for small pleasures that reminded them, however fleetingly, of the world they had left behind. You'd be sitting, perhaps, on an overturned barrel, the damp wood seeping into your worn breeches, the salty spray a constant presence on your lips. Around you the murmur of voices, the occasional clatter of a tool, and then a thin, reedy sound would cut through the air. A fiddle. Perhaps it was a salvaged instrument, its varnish peeling, its strings frayed, but in the hands of a skilled crewman, it could conjure melodies that spoke of distant taverns, of loves left behind, of childhood lullabies. The notes, sometimes mournful, sometimes surprisingly lively, would weave through the rigging carried by the wind, becoming one with the vastness of the ocean. You might close your eyes, letting the tune wash over you, a momentary balm for homesickness that ached deep in your bones, a fleeting courage against the ever-present shadow of fear. It wasn't just music, it was a lifeline, a thread connecting them to a humanity that the sea often seemed to strip away. Sometimes it would be a flute, its breathy notes like a whisper of land, a phantom breeze through trees that no longer existed in their immediate world. The music wasn't grand, no orchestras or grand chorales, but rather a solitary performance, snared amongst a small hardened family, each note carrying the weight of shared experience and unspoken longing. Imagine the feel of the deck beneath your feet, vibrating slightly with the rhythm of the waves, and then adding to that the subtle vibrations of a stringed instrument, resonating through the wood, through your very being. It was a physical experience as much as an auditory one, a full-body immersion in a moment of fragile beauty. The melodies, often simple folk tunes or sea shanties, would momentarily transport you away from the stench of unwashed bodies and stale rum, away from the grime and the constant threat. They were portals, small but potent, to memories of warmth, of laughter, of a life that felt far removed from the harsh reality of their present. Of course, not all entertainment was so wholesome or melancholic. The devil, as they say, finds work for idle hands, and on a pirate ship, idle hands were plentiful during the long lulls between raids. Gambling, an age-old vice, was a constant temptation. Picture the scene, a flickering lantern casting dancing shadows on a group huddled around a worn wooden surface. Their faces illuminated by the dim light, eyes sharp with avarice and hope. Dice would clatter, cards would be slapped down, voices would rise and fall with the fortunes of the game. The stakes, though often small in terms of actual currency, felt immense in the confined world of the ship. A few pieces of 8, a share of future plunder, even a prized belt buckle could change hands. However, the captains and quartermasters, pragmatic men schooled in the brutal realities of human nature, understood the corrosive power of debt and resentment. A quarrel over cards could escalate quickly, transforming into a bloody brawl that destabilized the fragile order of the ship. Therefore, many a pirate code, those self-made constitutions of the freebooter world, explicitly forbade gambling on board. It was a rule born not of morality, but of cold, hard practicality. Internal strife was a luxury they simply could not afford. The risk of one pirate cheating another, or one owing a significant sum to a shipmate, creating a festering animosity that could erupt into violence, was a far greater threat than any distant warship. The harmony, or rather, the uneasy truce amongst the crew, was paramount. So, while the urge to gamble might simmer beneath the surface, the rules often suppressed its outward expression, pushing it into clandestine corners or waiting for the brief, riotous shore leaves. Yet, beyond the music and the forbidden dice, there were simpler, safer pleasures that brought the crew together. Storytelling, as ancient as humanity itself, thrived in the dark, cavernous depths of a ship's hold or under the vast, star-peppered canopy of the night sky. Imagine the low drone of a voice, perhaps an old salt with a lifetime of wild tales, his eyes gleaming in the moonlight as he spun yarns of mythical beasts, impossible escapes, or exaggerated feats of bravery from previous voyages. These weren't just stories. They were a way of passing down history, of forging identity, of reaffirming their shared mythology. They were a shared escape, a communal dream woven from words, painting vibrant, sometimes terrifying, pictures in the listeners' minds. You could almost feel the phantom spray from a monster's breath, or taste the salt of a distant land through the speaker's vivid descriptions. And then there were the sea shanties, the true anthems of the maritime world. These weren't just songs for entertainment. They were functional, rhythmic chants designed to coordinate labor. As you heaved on a rope or turned a capstan, a collective voice would rise, synchronized and powerful, each chanty a testament to shared hardship and the camaraderie born of it. Haul away, Joe, or blow the man down. Snelvendy's calls weren't just lyrics. They were commands, anchors in the physical toil, making the monotonous work bearable, even purposeful. The communal singing, the deep voices blending in a raw, untutored harmony, served as a powerful bond, a reminder that they were all in this together, pulling the same ropes, facing the same perils. The sound itself, a deep, resonating hum against the constant rush of the waves, could be profoundly soothing, a reminder of human presence in an otherwise vast and indifferent world. This collective spirit, these shared moments of recreation, were not mere diversions. They were essential threads in the fabric of pirate society, crucial for maintaining a semblance of order and unity among a crew often composed of disparate, desperate men. Because on a pirate ship, particularly one where formal authority was often viewed with suspicion, the ties that bound the crew together had to be stronger, more personal than the decrees of a distant monarch. These were laws they made for themselves, laws that were born of necessity and enforced by the will of the collective. Before the anchors were raised, before the sails unfurled, and the ship lunged into the uncertain embrace of the open sea, every pirate ship embarked on a crucial ritual, the drafting and signing of its own unique pirate code. This wasn't some dusty legalistic tome, but a living document, hammered out in passionate discussions, often around a rough-hewn table or even shouted across a crowded deck. Imagine yourself there, in the jostling throng, the air thick with pipe smoke and anticipation. The captain, perhaps, would preside, but it was the collective voice of the crew that truly shaped these articles. This was no king's law, no royal decree handed down from on high. This was their law, forged in the crucible of their shared ambition and mutual desperation. And because it was their law born of their consent, it carried a weight and a legitimacy that no external authority could ever command. Each ship's code was distinct, a reflection of its crew's particular priorities and experiences. Yet certain core tenets echoed across the pirate fleet. At its heart lay the principles of loot distribution, a matter of paramount importance that could make or break a crew's cohesion. No more rigged prizes or greedy captains pocketing the lion's share. Here, every man, from the cabin boy to the first mate, knew exactly what his portion would be. The code would meticulously detail shares, a full share for every man, maybe a share and a half for the gunner, 2 shares for the captain. But beyond the spoils of victory, it also outlined a revolutionary concept for its time: social welfare. Lose a leg in battle. The code specified a sum of gold, a form of early disability insurance. Lose an arm, another amount. These were not acts of charity, but pragmatic measures to ensure that a wounded man no longer able to pull his weight would not be cast aside, a stark contrast to the brutal indifference of the merchant or naval services. You could almost hear the scratch of the quill or the grunt of a man making his mark thewing, often just an ex-dude on the parchment, sealing his commitment to this revolutionary pact. The feel of the rough paper, the ink staining your fingers, the collective weight of those signatures. It was a profound moment, a solemn oath taken among outlaws. Beyond the division of plunder, the pirate code delved into the minutiae of daily life, transforming a band of rogue sailors into a functioning, if unconventional, society. Rules against fighting on board, beyond the sanctioned duel to settle a grave insult, were common. Internal squabbles, particularly those fueled by too much rum, were a swift path to mutiny or worse. The code demanded a certain level of decorum, a practical respect for shipmates that, in its own rough way, fostered a sense of community. Picture the severity in a captain's voice as he read out the articles, the serious nods from the hardened faces of the crew. Imagine the sheer audacity of these men, creating a system that not only provided for them, but demanded a greater degree of fairness and respect than the civilized world from which they had fled. And then there were the smaller, yet equally vital, rules. Keeping weapons clean and ready was a non-negotiable. A rusty pistol or a dull cutlass could mean the difference between life and a swift, violent death. The code might dictate when lights had to be extinguished to avoid drawing attention, or when gambling was permitted, usually only on shore leave, to prevent on-board disputes. Punishments for infractions were clearly laid out, a lash for a minor offense being marooned on a deserted island for theft or desertion. These were harsh penalties, certainly, but they were agreed-upon penalties chosen by the very men who might one day suffer them. It was a form of self-governance, a democracy of the damned, where the collective held sway and the rules, however brutal, were ultimately their own. This self-created legal framework was the cornerstone of their unity, the invisible yet unbreakable chains that held this volatile collection of outlaws together, transforming them from mere criminals into a formidable, if fleeting, force on the high seas. Without it, the entire enterprise would collapse into chaos, each man fighting for himself, swallowed by the very lawlessness they embraced. It was a paradox. To be free of the king's law, they had to create their own, arguably stricter code. In this fiercely male-dominated world, where women were considered ill omens and familial ties were severed by the vast, uncaring ocean, human connection, deep and abiding, was still a primal need. And so, born out of economic necessity and the sheer, stark loneliness of life at sea, a unique social contract emerged, the Matelotage. It was more than friendship, deeper than camaraderie, a formal partnership forged in the shadow of constant peril. Imagine the quiet agreement, perhaps sealed with a handshake or a shared drink of rum between two men. I'll be your mate, and you'll be mine. This wasn't a casual arrangement. It was a binding alliance, a pact of mutual survival. Two pirates would officially pair up, becoming Matelots, a term that carried a weight of commitment. Their lives, their fates, became inextricably linked. They would share their meager possessions, find a blanket, a spare shirt, perhaps even a prized weapon, pooling their resources for the common good. You might see them sharing a pipe on the deck or silently mending fishing nets together, their movements synchronized, a silent understanding passing between them. Imagine the quiet comfort of knowing that in a world where betrayal lurked in every shadow, you had one person at least who truly had your back. The bond of Matelotage was cemented in the most brutal arena of all, combat. When the call to arms sounded, when the enemy ship loomed large and menacing, a Matelot's primary duty was to protect his partner. Standing shoulder to shoulder, cutlass flashing, pistol firing, they would cover each other's flanks, an unbreakable two-man unit in the swirling chaos of battle. The trust had to be absolute. For a moment's hesitation, a faltering blade could mean death for both. The shouts, the clang of steel, the acrid smell of gunpowder smoke. Through it all, the Matelot sought out his partner, ensuring his survival, or fighting for him if he fell. But the Matelotage pact extended beyond the heat of battle, into the cold, practical calculus of pirate life. It was, in essence, a form of life insurance, a pre-arranged will in a world without notaries or legal safeguards. If one Matelot were to fall in battle or succumb to disease, or simply disappear over the unforgiving waves, the other would automatically inherit all his possessions, his share of the loot, his meager savings. This ensured that a man's efforts, his risks, were not entirely lost, but would continue to benefit someone he trusted, someone who mattered. It was a starkly practical solution to the inherent instability of their existence, providing a modicum of security in a life defined by insecurity. Think of the silence that would descend when a Matelotage was lost, the grim determination in the survivor's eyes, not just to mourn but to carry on, now doubly burdened, yet also fiercely committed to honoring the shared legacy. This partnership, born of economic and survival needs, transcended the ordinary bonds of friendship. It was a legal, if unofficial, institution in a world devoid of conventional legality. In a time when men often left their homes never to return, with no family to claim their remains or their worldly goods, the Matelotage provided a unique form of continuity. It acknowledged the profound isolation of these men, who lived outside societal norms, and provided them with a self-made social structure, a chosen family, a deep, if sometimes unspoken, emotional anchor. It was a pragmatic expression of intimacy and loyalty, forged not in sentimentality, but in the crucible of shared danger and mutual reliance. The feeling of a hand on your shoulder, a knowing glance, the subtle assurance that you were not truly alone in this vast, terrifying world tuving. These were the quiet dividends of the Matelotage, a testament to the enduring human need for connection, even amidst the lawless embrace of the high seas. It added a layer of profound, almost sacred, trust to the brutal realities of their existence, making the impossible just a little more bearable. Now, let your mind drift, gently, across the shimmering waters of the early 18th century to a place where the lines of loyalty blurred and freedom, however fleeting, found its rough-hewn capital. Imagine, if you will, the Bahamian sun, a warm, heavy blanket settling over the emerald cays and turquoise shallows of Nassau. For a fleeting, wild stretch of time in the early 1700s, this bustling port wasn't just another colonial outpost. It was the audacious heart of a self-proclaimed pirate republic. Picture the scene, the constant murmur of the waves against sandy shores, mingling with the raucous laughter spilling from ramshackle taverns, the rhythmic clang of hammers repairing storm-beaten hulls, and the distant, ever-present scent of salt tar, and perhaps illicit rum. Nassau was more than just a haven. It was a living, breathing organism, a nexus where the laws of kings and empires simply dissolved into the warm tropical air. Here, fortunes were swiftly made and even more swiftly squandered. A ship, heavy with stolen goods, might glide silently into the harbor under the cloak of dawn, its hold overflowing with exotic spices, rich silks, precious timber, or the glint of Spanish silver. By midday, those very treasures would be finding new hands, bartered for fresh water, much-needed provisions, or the expertise of a seasoned carpenter. The docks hummed with activity, a constant ebb and flow of scoundrels and opportunists. Weary crews, fresh from a successful raid or a narrow escape, would spill ashore, their pockets heavy, their spirits higher than the gulls circling overhead. The taverns, dark and smoky, with their rough-hewn tables and sticky floors, became stages for boisterous tales of daring exploits, narrow escapes, and promises of future riches. The air would be thick with the aroma of cheap tobacco, the clinking of pewter tankards, and the slurred verses of sea shanties, sometimes soulful, often bawdy. This was the unofficial capital where legends walked among men. Blackbeard, that fearsome specter of the seas, was a familiar sight, his imposing figure casting long shadows as he strode through the bustling marketplace. Calico Jack, with his flamboyant attire and sharp wit, might be found sharing a jest or plotting a new venture over a tankard of ale. These were not mere transient visitors. They were residents, stakeholders in this audacious experiment in self-governance. They weren't just passing through, they were shaping the very fabric of this wild, untamed city. Nassau became a grand open-air market for the ill-gotten, a vast, unregulated exchange, where stolen goods found willing buyers, where skilled craftsmen could be hired to patch up a cannon, scarred hull, and where new recruits, hungry for adventure, or simply desperate for a different kind of freedom, could sign on with a captain and sail under the black flag. It was a place where the old rules were broken, shattered by the ambition and audacity of men who had chosen to live outside the established order. The brief, glorious reign of the Pirate Republic of Nassau was a testament to the irresistible allure of absolute freedom, even if that freedom was built on the shaky foundations of stolen wealth and the constant threat of swift, brutal retribution from the very empires they defied. But for a precious few decades, it was theirs, a sun-drenched, lawless dream floating on the edge of the known world, a whispered challenge to every crown and every flag that claimed dominion over the seas. Now, as the waves continue their gentle, rhythmic sigh against the distant shores, let your thoughts drift deeper into the peculiar world of these maritime rebels, a world almost exclusively dominated by men, by hardened sailors and desperate souls. And yet, even in this fiercely masculine domain, stories persist, tales of defiance that shimmer like heat haze over the ocean. Imagine the superstitions that clung to every mast and every plank, the whispered warnings that a woman aboard ship meant ill luck, a certain precursor to storms, mutiny, or worse. The very presence of a female was a challenge to the established order, a breach of the unwritten rules of the sea. It was a world of rough hands, gruff voices, and the constant, unsettling presence of danger, where vulnerability was a luxury few could afford. Yet, from the annals of this brutal age, two names emerge, shining with a fierce, almost improbable defiance: Anne Bonny and Mary Red. They were not just women who snailed. They were warriors who fought disguised in men's clothing, their identities a carefully guarded secret amidst the roiling chaos of pirate life. Picture them, if you can, not as delicate figures, but as hardened individuals, their hands calloused from rigging, their faces weathered by sun and salt spray, their eyes sharp with a desperate resolve. To survive, they had to shed more than just their feminine garments. They had to shed every expectation, every societal constraint placed upon their gender. They were forced to adopt the swagger, the language, and the ruthless efficiency of the men around them to become indistinguishable from their male counterparts in the thick of battle. Their story is not one of romanticized adventure, but of stark, brutal survival, a testament to an almost unimaginable resilience. They had to prove themselves not just once, but every single day, with every swing of a cutlass, every command bellowed over the roar of cannon fire. Imagine the constant tension of maintaining a disguise, the fear of exposure, the absolute necessity of appearing strong, unyielding, and utterly fearless. Their skill with a pistol or a blade was not a novelty. It was a prerequisite for their very existence. They were not mere passengers or ornaments. They were active participants in the grim dance of piracy, engaging in fierce boarding actions, standing shoulder to shoulder with men who would have condemned them for their true gender. The tales of their ferocity in combat are chilling, spoken with a mixture of awe and terror by those who witnessed it. They were said to be more ruthless than many men, perhaps driven by the heightened stakes, the desperate knowledge that discovery meant not just death, but potentially an even worse fate. And Bonnie and Mary Red represent not just a curious footnote in pirate history, but a profound illustration of the extreme conditions that could force individuals to transcend the rigid boundaries of their time. Their lives were a constant negotiation between concealment and combat, between societal expectation and personal survival. They were outliers, fiery exceptions in a world that sought to extinguish any such spark of female autonomy. Their legends, though rare, burn brightly, reminding us that even in the most unforgiving and patriarchal environments, courage knows no gender, and the will to survive, to define one's own destiny, can manifest in the most unexpected and powerful ways, leaving an indelible mark on the rough seas of history. As the gentle sway of the imagined ship continues to lull, let your mind turn to another figure, one whose legend is inextricably woven into the very fabric of pirate lore. His name, spoken in hushed tones across the Caribbean, was Edward Teach, though history remembers him by his fearsome moniker, Blackbeard. Yet, the true genius of Blackbeard lay not just in his brutal strength or his navigational prowess, but in his profound, almost theatrical understanding of fear itself. He was, in essence, an early master of psychological warfare, a pioneer in the art of terror marketing. Picture his arrival not as a random ambush, but as a meticulously orchestrated spectacle designed to paralyze his opponents even before the first shot was fired. His ship, the Fuinan's Revenge, would loom on the horizon, its dark sails a stark silhouette against the setting sun or the stormy skies. And then there was the man himself. His iconic black beard, long and luxuriant, was not just a natural growth. It was a carefully cultivated brand. He would often braid it with colorful ribbons, intertwining strands of hemp, giving it a wild, almost unnatural volume. But the true stroke of his genius lay in what he would do just before boarding an enemy vessel. He would tuck slow, burning fuses under his wide-brimmed hat, allowing tendrils of smoke to curl around his face, giving him the appearance of a demon, a creature of myth emerging from the very depth of hell. His eyes, glinting in the flickering light, would bore into his terrified victims, amplifying the horror. This wasn't mere vanity or a love of drama. It was a calculated strategy. His goal was not necessarily to engage in a prolonged, bloody battle, which was costly in terms of cannon shot, manpower, and potential damage to his own ship. No, Blackbeard's true objective was to induce such profound, unadulterated terror in his victims that they would simply surrender without a fight. Imagine being a merchant captain staring across the waves at this apparition, a towering figure wreathed in smoke, eyes burning with a hellish intensity, his massive beard a tangled mass of darkness. The mere sight of him, the fortification that preceded him, was often enough. Crews would drop their weapons, hoist the white flag, and yield their cargo, their lives, everything, to avoid the wrath of this living nightmare. He was a master of the grotesque, a living embodiment of the stories whispered in port taverns. Every detail, from the multiple pistols and cutlasses he wore strapped across his chest to the imposing figure he cut, was designed to amplify his terrifying image. He understood that a reputation for merciless brutality, even if exaggerated, was far more effective than actual consistent violence. Why risk a man's life or damage a perfectly good ship when you could simply scare the wits out of an entire crew? This form of intimidation saved him time, resources, and reduced casualties on his own side. He was a psychological tactician, manipulating the fears of his enemies with a chilling precision. The acrid smell of burning rope, the visual spectacle of smoke and shadow, the sheer force of his presence, these were his deadliest weapons. He wasn't just a pirate, he was a performance artist of terror, and his stage was the vast, unforgiving expanse of the open sea. His legacy is not just one of plunder, but of the chilling effectiveness of fear, skillfully wielded as a tool of absolute power. Beyond the bluster and the fearsome beard, there existed another kind of pirate, one whose legend whispers of an almost paradoxical elegance. We turn our thoughts now to Bartholomew Roberts, often known as Black Bart, a figure who defied every expectation of what a buccaneer should be. Imagine, if you will, a man of the sea, clad not in tattered rags or rough wool, but in fine silks and velvets, perhaps a crimson waistcoat, gleaming buttons, and a feathered hat perched just so. He carried himself with an air of cultivated poise, a stark contrast to the rough and tumble swagger of many of his contemporaries. His hands, though capable of wielding a cutlass with deadly precision, would often hold a book or perhaps a navigational instrument, rather than a tankard of ale. Black Bart was a man of strict discipline, a quality as rare on a pirate ship as a quiet sunrise in a bustling port. He abstained entirely from alcohol, a personal choice that set him apart in a world awash with rum and grog. Picture the dimly lit deck of a captured merchantman, the smell of salt and old timbers, and then imagine a quiet gathering, not for boisterous revelry, but for a solemn religious service, led by Black Bart himself. His crew, though a collection of hardened men, followed his peculiar code, perhaps out of respect, perhaps out of a pragmatic understanding of its success. This unusual blend of piety and predation made him a truly singular figure in the annals of piracy. His success, however, was anything but subtle. Bartholomew Roberts was arguably the most successful pirate of the Golden Age, a relentless force who, in a remarkably short career, plundered an astonishing number of vessels. Over 400 ships fell prey to his elegant, yet utterly merciless, efficiency. His methods weren't reliant on brute force alone, but on swiftness, surprise, and an almost chilling tactical intelligence. He would appear suddenly, a phantom on the horizon, his sails billowing, his approach silent but inexorable. The merchants, often lulled into a false sense of security by the vastness of the ocean, would find themselves suddenly outmaneuvered, their routes anticipated, their escape cut off. Think of the sheer logistical challenge of such a feat. Each capture required coordination, swift boarding parties, the securing of cargo, and the careful management of his own fleet, which at times grew to include several ships. Yet, Roberts navigated these complexities with the precision of a seasoned admiral. His pirate code, meticulously drafted and strictly enforced, outlined everything from the share of plunder to the upkeep of weapons, ensuring that his crew remained a well-oiled, formidable machine. Disobeying Black Bart was not merely a breach of etiquette, it was an act of defiance against a meticulously constructed order, and the consequences were often swift and severe, delivered with the same calm resolve he brought to every other aspect of his life. So, as the gentle rocking of the waves lulls you, consider this elegant predator, a testament to the diverse and often contradictory nature of the pirate world, where a gentleman could also be a terror, and discipline could be a key to unimaginable wealth. As our journey continues, let's shift our gaze from the refined leader to the very essence of what pirates sought, the glimmering treasure. While tales often conjure images of chests overflowing with gold doubloons and priceless jewels, the reality was often more practical. Yet, among the tangible rewards, one item stood out: a constant, weighty presence in their pockets and straw boxes, the Spanish silver coin known as the piece of 8, or in its full glory, the real de8. Imagine holding one in your palm, feeling the cool, solid weight of history. These weren't mere coins. They were the arteries of global commerce in the 17th and 18th centuries. The pieces of 8 were minted primarily in the Spanish colonies of the New World, particularly in Mexico and Peru, from the vast silver mines that fueled the Spanish Empire. Picture the journey of that silver, extracted from deep earth, smelted, purified, and then struck into these distinctive coins. They bore the image of the reigning Spanish monarch on one side, perhaps a shield or a coat of arms on the other, and often the 2 pillars of Hercules, representing the Straits of Gibraltar, with a banner unfurled around them bearing the motto Plus Ultra, meaning further beyond. Each coin was renowned for its consistent purity and standardized weight, making it instantly recognizable and trusted from the bustling markets of Canton to the taverns of Port Royal. It was, in essence, the cryptocurrency of its day, universally accepted and valued. Pirates coveted these coins not for their artistic merit, but for their liquid value. A piece of 8 could buy a round of rum, settle a debt, purchase supplies, or fuel a night of revelry. But imagine the practical challenge of making change in a world before widespread smaller denominations. If you had a piece of 8 and needed to buy something worth less, what would you do? This leads us to one of the most intriguing practicalities of pirate life, and indeed a common practice of the time: the bidding of coins. Picture a pirate perhaps on the deck of his ship, or in a dimly lit tavern. He needs change, but no one has it. So, he reaches for his trusty cutlass, or more likely, a small, sturdy axe. With a measured blow, the piece of 8 would be literally chopped into smaller, crude pieces. Each cut represented a bit, and the standard practice was to cleave the coin into 8 roughly equal wedges. This wasn't precision work. The edges would be rough, often jagged, but the weight and silver content of each bit was understood. This ancient practice, born of necessity, gave rise to a phrase still echoing in our language today. When you hear 2 bits used to mean a quarter, you are hearing the direct legacy of those Spanish silver coins, roughly 2/8 of an original piece of 8. So, while the stories speak of glittering hoards, imagine the clatter of these real, tangible coins, perhaps with a slight dulling from salt and handling, bearing the marks of their arduous journey from mine to mint, and finally into the hands of a pirate. These coins represented not just wealth, but freedom, fleeting and dangerous as it was. They were the means to an end, the currency of adventure and survival, far more than idle baubles. They weren't meant to be buried and forgotten, but spent and savored, a tangible reward for lives lived on the razor's edge. The true treasure, then, was not just the coin itself, but the ephemeral moment of power and pleasure it could buy. Yet, for all the daring raids, the fleeting riches, and the boisterous freedom, the pirate's path was, almost without exception, a road leading to a single, inevitable fork. Very few pirates lived to a ripe old age telling tales by the fire in a cozy cottage. The average career span for a pirate during the Golden Age was shockingly brief, often lasting only 2 to 3 years. It was a high-stakes, high-risk game, or the house in this case. The formidable navies of Europe always eventually won. The paths from the life of piracy diverged sharply into 2 main destinations, neither of which promised a gentle descent into old age. The first and most common was the grim embrace of the gallows. Imagine the scene: a bustling port city, the air thick with anticipation, the crowd murmuring, drawn by the macabre spectacle. A pirate, perhaps defiant, perhaps broken, would be led to the scaffold. This wasn't merely an execution. It was a public performance, a stark warning against challenging the established order. The creak of the rope, the sudden drop, the gasps from the onlookers. These were chilling lessons delivered by the state. But the punishment often didn't end with death. To amplify the deterrent, the bodies of particularly infamous pirates would undergo a horrifying final act. Gibbeting, picture the corpse, tarred to preserve it from decay, then encased in an iron cage. This grim effigy would then be hoisted high, often at a prominent point along the coastline or at the harbor entrance, left to swing in the wind, a gruesome, silent sentinel. The sight, the smell carried on the breeze, a potent, undeniable message to any aspiring buccaneer, a constant reminder of the price of rebellion. You might imagine the seabirds circling, the weathering of the cage, the gradual disintegration, a slow public erasure of the pirate's existence, transforming a once feared figure into a decaying scarecrow of justice. This was the ultimate theatrical flourish of imperial power, ensuring that even in death the pirate served as a tool of state control. The second path, a narrow and often uncertain one, was the king's pardon. At various times, desperate to quell the rampant piracy that choked trade routes, European monarchs, particularly the British Crown, would issue acts of grace. These pardons offered a chance for pirates to surrender, forsake their way of life, and receive clemency, effectively wiping their slate clean of past crimes. Imagine the internal struggle. To continue the dangerous, exhilarating, but ultimately doomed existence, or to cast aside the black flag and return to the anonymity of civilian life. For some, it was a practical decision, a chance to escape the looming shadow of the gallows. They would walk ashore, perhaps with a portion of their ill-gotten gains, and attempt to reintegrate into a society they had so vehemently rejected. But this return was rarely easy. The stigma of piracy was deep, trust was scarce, and finding honest work could be a monumental challenge. Many former pirates found themselves in a new kind of bind, still on the fringes, perhaps forced into legitimate but equally harsh maritime labor, their newfound freedom more akin to a gilded cage. For others, the lure of the sea, the thrill of the chase, and the camaraderie of their crew were too strong to resist, and they chose to sail on, knowing full well the fate that awaited them, choosing a swift, violent end over a slow, quiet fade. So, as you drift deeper into the tranquility of your own safe harbor, reflect on these stark choices. The pirate's life, though romanticized in legend, was a brief, brutal dash across the ocean, a fleeting rebellion against authority. It ended almost universally in one of these two ways: the public ignominy of the gallows, or the quiet, often difficult, reconciliation with a world they had once scorned. Their freedom was a precious, perilous commodity, bought at an immense price, and its payment was often exacted in the final chilling moments of their lives. Friend, when the night descends, please let your thoughts drift with me towards those blue and perilous waters. The Caribbean Sea. In its golden age 300 years ago, it was a pirate's paradise, an empire's nightmare. But tonight, we seek not Captain Jack's treasure, but the truth hidden beneath the legends. First, let's begin with that most classic scene of punishment. Now, as the stories unfold, let your mind gently wander, allowing the rhythm of the waves to calm your breath and the whispers of history to soothe your spirit. Perhaps one of the most intriguing aspects of pirate lore, and one that resonates deeply with our human connection to language, is the very lexicon they employed. Many of the phrases we now associate exclusively with swashbuckling buccaneers weren't born in the shadowy depths of pirate dens, but were, in fact, the common utilitarian language of sailors across all ships and navies of the era. They were the practical tools of communication, honed by the wind and the waves, echoing across decks and through rigging, before they were ever cloaked in the romanticized mystique of piracy. Consider for a moment the command avast ye. It sounds so inherently pirate, doesn't it? A guttural, attention-grabbing bark across a rolling deck. Yet, avast ye simply meant pay attention or stop and listen. It was a standard nautical directive, a crisp, immediate call to action when a shipmate needed to be alerted to a task, a danger, or an instruction. Imagine the sheer volume of noise on a sailing ship thawing. The groaning timbers, the snapping sails, the whistling wind, the constant slap of water against the hull. In such an environment, clear, concise commands were not merely helpful, they were vital for survival. Avast ye cut through the din, a linguistic anchor in a sea of sounds, ensuring that critical information reached its intended ears. It was a word of practicality, imbued with urgency and consequence, long before it became a theatrical flourish in tales of buried gold. Its rhythm, a short, sharp burst, was perfectly designed to grab attention, to halt a task, to make a sailor pause and open their ears, bracing for the next vital piece of information. The word itself, perhaps deriving from the Dutch, houdvast, meaning hold fast, carries within it the very essence of maritime discipline and the shared responsibility of a crew at sea. Then there is the truly evocative phrase, Davy Jones' locker. This isn't just a grim idiom, it is a profound personification of the ocean's consuming power, the watery grave of all who perished at sea. Davy Jones wasn't a historical pirate captain or a specific individual. He was, and remains, a folkloric devil of the deep, a malevolent spirit of the ocean's darkest, coldest reaches. His locker wasn't a chest or a cabinet, but the crushing, lightless abyss beneath the waves where drowned sailors were said to be eternally confined. The phrase captures the raw terror and respect sailors held for the unpredictable, often deadly, nature of the sea. For those who plied the waters, drowning was a constant, looming threat, a silent, unseen predator lurking beneath the surface. To be sent to Davy Jones' locker was to be lost forever, beyond recovery, beyond memorial, swallowed by the vast, indifferent blue. It's a phrase steeped in fear, but also in a kind of grim poetry, an acknowledgement of the ultimate fate awaiting many who chose a life on the waves. The very sound of it, the lingering Davy, the chilling Jones, and the stark finality of Locker, paints a picture in the mind's eye of cold green depths, sunken ships, and the unquiet souls of the drowned. These aren't just words, they are echoes of an ancient fear, a cultural memory of humanity's precarious relationship with the mighty ocean. Other words, too, like shiver me timbers or ahoy, were similarly part of the common nautical vernacular. Shiver me timbers was an exclamation of surprise or disbelief, conjuring the image of a ship's wooden structure groaning and splintering in a storm or under cannon fire. It vividly brought to mind the violent stress a vessel could endure, translating that physical shock into an emotional one. Ahoy was a simple greeting, a way to hail another ship or to call out to someone across the water, its open vowel sound designed to carry clearly over distances. Even words like landlubber, though often used with a scornful edge, simply describe someone unfamiliar with the sea, a person whose feet were firmly planted on solid ground. These terms, whether practical commands, expressions of awe, or gentle insults, formed the rich tapestry of maritime communication. Over time, as stories of pirates grew, fueled by penny dreadfuls, romantic novels, and theatrical plays, these common nautical terms were selectively extracted and exaggerated, becoming shorthand for the adventurous, lawless pirate life. They became the distinguishing marks, the linguistic costume, that helped define the pirate character in the popular imagination. The true pirates, the men and women who sailed the Caribbean, didn't invent a new language. They simply spoke the language of the sea, a language that, through the lens of legend, became uniquely their own. So, when you hear these words, let them carry you back, not just to the fantastical pirate, but to the everyday sailor, whose life was a constant dance with the elements, and whose words were forged in the crucible of wind, water, and wooden ships. The legacy of the Jolly Roger, that iconic skull and crossbones, extends far beyond the era of the Golden Age of Piracy. It is a symbol that, remarkably, found a profound and unexpected rebirth in the most unlikely of places, within the ranks of a modern, disciplined military force. This transformation, this symbolic handoff from lawless rebels to esteemed servicemen, is a testament to the flag's enduring power as a defiant emblem, a banner of courage and an unspoken challenge to authority, all wrapped in a cloak of shared identity. In the harrowing theaters of both the First and Second World Wars, a new breed of seafarer emerged, one that operated beneath the waves in an unseen, terrifying realm. The submariner. These brave men, often isolated and facing unimaginable pressures, found kinship with the spirit of the old pirates, not in their plundering, but in their daring independence and their often unconventional approach to warfare. The British Royal Navy's submarine service, specifically, adopted the Jolly Roger as an unofficial yet deeply cherished symbol. It was a defiant gesture, a subtle, almost secret nod to a rogue spirit within the rigid structure of naval command. Imagine the scene: a British submarine, after weeks, perhaps months, lurking silently in the cold, dangerous depths, completing a vital, perilous mission. They faced the constant threat of depth charges, the crushing pressure of the sea, the claustrophobia, and the ever-present danger of discovery. Now they are returning to port, victorious, as the submarine slowly surfaces, breaking the calm expanse of water, cutting through the waves with its sleek, gray form. A cheer erupts, and then a flag is hoisted. Not the standard naval ensign, but a black banner adorned with the white skull and crossbones having the Jolly Roger. Each successful mission 50, a ship sunk, an enemy encountered, a daring reconnaissance completed 50, was marked by a unique addition to the flag, a white bar for a merchant ship, a red bar for a warship, a dagger for a clandestine landing, or even a star for a heroic act. These weren't mere decorations. They were the submariners' battle honors proudly displayed, a visual tally of their daring exploits. This act of flying the Jolly Roger was a powerful statement. It was a way for these silent warriors, often operating in the shadows and performing tasks that were perhaps not fully understood or appreciated by those on land, to assert their achievements and their distinct identity. It spoke of a quiet rebellion, a respectful defiance of the formal military bureaucracy that sometimes struggled to comprehend the unique nature of submarine warfare. In a world of strict protocols and regulations, this unofficial tradition allowed them to carve out a symbolic space of their own, connecting them to a past where audacity and a certain disregard for convention were celebrated on the high seas. The symbolism of the flag in this new context transformed. While pirates used it to strike terror into their enemies and announce their lawless intent, the submariners imbued it with a different kind of defiance. It became a symbol of courage in the face of overwhelming odds, of skill in the art of stealth, and of a shared camaraderie forged in the crucible of extreme danger. It represented their ability to operate effectively and victoriously, often against conventional expectations, silently slipping through enemy waters to deliver devastating blows. This modern rebirth of the Jolly Roger speaks to a deeper human truth, the enduring power of symbols to represent identity, to foster group cohesion, and to articulate a spirit of rebellion, even within established systems. The flag, once the terror of the seas, now stood for a different kind of bravery, a silent, calculated audacity that mirrored, in spirit, the daring of their ancient predecessors. It's a remarkable testament to how meaning can evolve, how a symbol can shed its initial connotations of criminality and embrace new ones of heroism, perseverance, and a uniquely British, understated defiance. The Jolly Roger, in this context, wasn't just a flag. It was a badge of honor, a whispered legend, and a proud, unconventional declaration of victory and belonging, linking the silent depths of the 20th century to the wild open waters of the 17th. And so, the pirates of the Golden Age, those figures of legend and defiance, eventually vanished into the relentless tides of history, their ships sinking into the depths, their voices fading into the whispers of the wind. What they left behind wasn't a sprawling empire, nor a vast undiscovered hoard of gold waiting to be unearthed by a lucky adventurer. Instead, they bequeathed to us something far more ephemeral, yet profoundly resonant, a brief, resolute phantom of freedom. It wasn't true freedom in the modern sense, not a freedom secured by rights or justice, but a wild, often brutal, imitation forged in the crucible of necessity and rebellion. In a world rigidly bound by the decrees of kings, the vast reach of empires, and the harsh, unyielding rules of society, these men and women dared to carve out a space for themselves where no such strictures applied. They were, in essence, the ultimate self-made individuals of their time, operating beyond the pale of law and order, creating a fleeting, tumultuous republic on the vast, indifferent ocean. Their lives were an endless struggle, a perilous dance with death, hunger, and disease, yet they chose it over the perceived enslavement of honest work in a system that offered them little dignity or hope. They sought to escape the lash of the merchant captain, the meager pay, the brutal punishments, and the crushing weight of a society that saw them as disposable cogs in a larger machine. This phantom of freedom they chased was a paradox. It promised autonomy, the right to choose their captain, to vote on their fortunes, to live by their own code. Yet this freedom was often accompanied by intense violence, constant fear, and the ever-looming threat of the gallows. They were free to plunder, but also free to die brutally. They were masters of their own destiny, but that destiny was invariably short and often tragic. Yet, within this harsh reality, there was a fierce, undeniable allure, a fee. The allure of making one's own rules, of taking what one desired, and of living outside the suffocating constraints of established authority, even if only for a few fleeting years. Their lawless republic was a ship, a temporary floating world where distinctions of class and origin often melted away, replaced by a shared vulnerability and a common, audacious purpose. They were not utopian idealists. They were desperate pragmatists, seeking a better, albeit riskier, deal than the one society offered. Tonight, as these echoes of forgotten seas and rebellious spirits gently fade into the background, let the phantom of their freedom, with all its complexities and contradictions, dissolve into the quiet comfort of your surroundings. Feel the gentle sway of your own world, a world where choices are perhaps less stark and dangers less immediate. Allow the vast, dark expanse of the historical ocean to recede, taking with it the creak of timbers, the shouts of battle, and the longing for a freedom both exhilarating and terrifying. Let the stories of these bygone adventurers settle like soft sand at the bottom of a tranquil sea. The whispers of the waves, the imagined chill of the sea breeze, the distant cries of gulls. Let these natural rhythms cradle you. Your mind, having journeyed across centuries and boundless waters, can now find its true harbor. As the last remnants of their saga drift away, feel the soothing weight of your own body, sinking deeper into the warmth and stillness. The ocean of history is calm now, its surface smooth, reflecting only the silent, watchful stars. There is nothing left to chase, nothing left to fear, only the soft, rhythmic hush of your own breath. Allow the gentle current of sleep to draw you in, a tide of profound peace. Let your eyelids grow heavy as if weighted by the quietude of a moonlit night at sea. Each breath you take is a soft wave, slowly carrying you further from the shore of waking thought into the deep, calm waters of slumber. The legends have been told, the stories have been shared. Now let this sea of legends, vast and timeless, accompany you gently, slowly, softly, into dreamless sleep.